Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Jacob and Jacob podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Pear. As always, joined by my co-host, Jacob Robom. And today, we're joined by the brains behind ESPN's Bracketology, Joe Lunardi. Thanks for being with us today, Joe.
I'm happy to do it, fellas. I'm happy to be called the brains of anything.
So, Joe, as one Philly guy to another, what's your favorite cheesesteak place?
Oh, good question. Well, I mean, I probably had the most cheesesteaks in my life at Larry's, across the street from St. Joe's, because that's where I worked for so many years. But if I only had one like cheesesteak, if it was my last cheesesteak on earth, I would probably go Jim's on 2nd Street.
You ever been to D'Alessandro's?
Oh, I forgot about that. No, absolutely D'Alessandro's. Yes, my bad. The advantage of Jim's is then you can walk around to the Franklin Fountain after and get ice cream.
Good point. They do have some great ice cream there. But anyways, let's get it started. So, Joe, how did you come up with bracketology?
Well, I'd like to say that there was this master plan, right, that made it all possible. But the truth of the matter is, so many of the things that make bracketology what it is, namely, my ability to interact with fans online, didn't exist when I was growing up in college basketball. Like your Philly area guys, I grew up around the Palestra going to Big Five games when all the teams still played there. And there was no such thing as the internet or bracketology or even understanding how the NCAA tournament was put together. I just had always been a fan of the tournament, and fortunately covering the local teams as a reporter, and before that just being a fan of the local teams. In a given year there was always a couple that were really good, and would be at least involved in tournament speculation and generally getting in and doing well. So that was where it started, was through a love and a following of the Big Five, and then just kind of rooting for whatever local teams happen to make it.
Have you always been a big college basketball guy?
I actually, my first, if you want to call it, truest, oldest sports passion is the Flyers. I played hockey. It was the only sport I was any good at, because I was small and fast and sneaky, and I could skate a little bit. And roller hockey and street hockey were huge in the 70s growing up, where we did, because it was the Broad Street Bullies era and all that. And it was only really after I got to St. Joe's in the late 70s as a student, and I was working for the student newspaper and got assigned to cover basketball, that I really became a college basketball guy. I'm still a huge hockey guy. I love the Stanley Cup playoffs. And fortunately, in a non-pandemic situation, college basketball usually ends right around the time the Stanley Cup playoffs start. So it helps me get over the withdrawal of the end of hoop season.
Are you still a big Flyers fan?
I am a big Flyers fan. I mean, it's not the same as, in the 70s and 80s when I lived and died, but somewhere around here, I still have my Bobby Clark jersey.
So let's go into a little bit about the specifics of how you make a bracket. What are the biggest factors you look at? Obviously, aside from the teams that that win their conference tournament and get an automatic bid, but for teams that don't, what are the biggest factors you look at for teams that will get in?
Well, I think what a lot of people don't understand is they think I'm giving my opinion. Right? Like, oh, Joe doesn't have my team in, he doesn't like my school. Right? I mean, that's a natural position to take as a fan, right?
Yeah.
Because being a fan is short for fanatic, right? And that's okay. But the truth of the matter is, what I'm really doing in any given bracket projection is forecasting what I think the committee will do, right? Because ultimately that is my job. Everybody else in college basketball is giving their opinion on who they think should be where in the field, right? Like that's what makes fandom, and that's great. But that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, do my own biases occasionally creep in? Of course, I'm human too. But what I'm doing is what I think they're going to do. So, Jacob, the answer to the question, what do I look at the most, is whatever I think they're looking at the most, because the two things go hand in hand. If I think they're looking at top 50 wins this year, or record away from home, or teams that wear blue, whatever the case may be, that's where I'm going to put my emphasis.
Have you ever, when you release your final bracket before the committee actually selects theirs, have you ever had yours identical to what the committee puts, or
I've had all the teams correct. I've never had it identical, like every team in every region in the 8 sites. Perfect. I'm not sure that's mathematically possible, given the number of permutations that probably exist on, well, if every number 13 seed can be in 4 different places, and every 14th seed can be in 4 different places, and so on and so on and so on, I'll take getting as close to 68 as humanly possible as a good enough job.
So right now there's a lot of uncertainty with the tournament. Do you believe that in March we'll be seeing 68 teams make March Madness, or do you believe it will be cut shorter to maybe 48 teams or 16 teams?
And this is a guess, right? Any of us who know which way this pandemic is going to go, or what the new presidential administration might take as an approach that could be different from the old administration or the outgoing administration. I'm not trying to get political here. I'm just saying I think it could be different. Suppose we have a shutdown, an enforced shutdown, and a month of the season gets cut, and some leagues opt not to come back, right? Because it's too much money, or too much testing, or too much time, or cost, or trouble. That could impact the field. Suppose it's determined that it's just not safe to bring 68 teams to Indianapolis, and it's too difficult to quarantine all that personnel. Right now they say they want to have a tournament with 68 teams as per usual. Well, great. I really hope we do.
Me too.
And I think the chances are probably better than 50-50 that we will. But it's not 99% chance. I mean, there's not a 99% chance of anything right now, except that the only thing that's certain is all the uncertainty, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And to say that I know, or or the governor of Indiana knows, or the head of the NCAA knows, it strikes me as, kind of a fool's errand.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. But so let's talk about the current college basketball season and what we've sort of seen to this point. One team that's really set themselves apart is Gonzaga. And when you look at how well they've played, how dominant they've been, what teams do you sort of see matching up best with them that have the best shot to take them down?
Yeah, I guess the one way of looking at it is, you need another team that can really score, right? Because, it's going to take 85, 90, 95 points to beat Gonzaga in most situations. So you think of the higher octane teams, but we tried that with Iowa, right? That didn't go very well. We tried it with West Virginia. That was a little better, but ultimately didn't go very well. So maybe you need the physical, slow it down, grind it out defensive team. Maybe you need Baylor, a game that was postponed. Maybe you need Tennessee, a game that was scheduled and was postponed. Or maybe you need familiarity, a team that I'm thinking of teams from the West Coast, the West Coast Conference, like BYU historically plays Gonzaga very tough, and they play tonight, right? Those two teams tonight, as we're recording this episode. Is BYU better than Gonzaga? If they played 10 times on a neutral court, what would happen? Gonzaga would win 9 of them.
Yeah.
Right. But the great thing about college basketball is it only takes the one time.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. In March, anything can happen.
So as the average sports fan, everyone loves to see that Cinderella story sneak into the Final Four or maybe make a run at the tournament. We've seen it in past years, Loyola, Chicago, UMBC upsetting Virginia. This season, if you had to predict right now, who would be that Cinderella team in March? A very, very early prediction.
I think you got to go with Drake at this point.
Yeah,
They're
13-0.
13-0.
Yeah.
And not only that, they've already hit the minimum number of games that you have to play to be eligible for this year's tournament. The committee say you have to play 13 games. So maybe Drake should just shut it down and see if they could be a 1 seed. Oops, we can't play anymore. Obviously I'm exaggerating, but why not Drake? Other teams that would be flying under the radar that are really good that people don't know about. Winthrop.
They're 9-0, right?
Boise State. I'm sorry.
Winthrop's 9-0, right?
Winthrop is undefeated. Correct.
Yeah.
A little higher power program, but they've been on pause for a couple of weeks. St. Louis, out of the Atlantic 10, has some terrific computer ratings. They're going to get a great seed if they keep it going. So, yeah, if the committee is smart enough to leave a few spots open for the lesser known, we'll have our share of Cinderellas.
So we talked about Gonzaga, but aside from them, what other teams have sort of impressed you more than you expected this season?
I'll tell you the best teams that I've seen, and we're not seeing any games in person. I've been to one game. I had to broadcast one local game back at the end of December. Gonzaga is obviously terrific. I assume that Baylor is as well, but they haven't really been tested, and they've also been paused a lot. Same for Villanova. I would have started the year saying those are your top 3. But outside of the Gonzaga, the best team that I've seen with frequency is Tennessee. They are a great defensive team. And they are loaded and young and very physical and aggressive at every position. So I would say the Vols, and a team that's really impressed in the Big Ten. Everybody talks about Iowa with Garza and Illinois with the 2 guys who came back, Wisconsin, all the seniors, and we have Michigan State. But the team that's 5-0 in the Big Ten is Michigan. And they just absolutely took a really good Minnesota team to the woodshed last night. And they have a 7-footer named Hunter Dickinson, who wasn't even a starter at the beginning of the year and is playing like a first-team All-American. So I don't think we can rule out Michigan at this point. They've played enough games where that 0 in the loss column gets your attention.
So you brought up the Big Ten in Michigan and Minnesota. I want to discuss the Big Ten, and they beat up on each other all season long to this point. There's been upsets, or I don't even know if I'd call them upsets, because a lot of the teams were really good in that conference, and you see higher teams lose. Does that affect them negatively, or do you think it looks better that the teams are so competitive with each other?
I think this year, especially, well, I think the highest level of competition you can play is generally a good thing. Because you're not going to win 6 games in the NCAA tournament without beating 3 or 4, maybe even 5 really good ones. After that, a lot of times it's just who's got the hot hand on a given day and your matchup. Having said that, there have been other years where the Big Ten has looked incredibly deep and competitive. Yet, we're reminded of the fact it's been over 2 decades since the Big Ten has won the national championship. 2000 with Michigan State.
Yep.
They've had a number of Final Four teams in that span. Michigan's been there multiple times. Michigan State's been there multiple times. Wisconsin's been there a couple times. Ohio State's been to the Final Four. I'm probably leaving someone out.
Yeah.
But
Wisconsin's been.
I'm sorry.
I was adding Wisconsin.
Yeah, they've been a couple times.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think until they get to the end and win on Monday night, right, in the championship game, people are going to kind of still look at the Big Ten with a crooked eye. And I don't think that's fair necessarily, but they've done it to themselves. So, this year, somebody from the Big Ten or the Big 12 is going to win the national championship, in my opinion, unless Gonzaga gets there first.
No ACC?
ACC doesn't really impress me at all.
Duke is weak this year.
Yeah, and now, again, we haven't seen what was supposed to be the real Duke. They've only played 6 games.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they lost at home to Illinois and Michigan State.
And the loss of Jalen Johnson's just impacted them.
It's hurt them a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this critically or non-critically. I'm just stating what appears to be a pretty clear observation. Starting with the coach, their heart really doesn't seem to be in it. And we saw in the NBA playoffs, like the teams that really wanted to be there and enduring everything you have to endure to play in these COVID times seem to have an advantage. And I don't know if they want to be there. And I think ultimately that'll bite them.
Now, it's almost inevitable that the Big Ten is going to have the most teams in the tournament this year. It would take a collapse from a lot.
Well, it helps to have 14 to start with.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Only the ACC has more. They have 15.
Yeah. Now, but aside from the Big Ten, the SEC not as strong this year with Kentucky sort of falling off, but they're still strong. They'll put a few teams in. What other conference do you see putting the most teams in the tournament?
Well, the Big Ten is going to get double digits, I believe, 10 or 11. The ACC will come next. They're just not going to have any 1s and 2s. The ACC is going to have 8 or 9, more than likely. And again, we're talking about out of 15, right? Like the Big 12 only has 10. So if they get 7, in a way, you could say that's better than getting 9 out of 15, right? That's 70% versus 60%. Whoever is counting in Big Ten headquarters is probably going to say, well, that means we're better than them. And they are this year anyway.
So we were talking about Iowa earlier and their superstar of a player, Luka Garza. Is Luka Garza a lock for the Wooden Award this season, or are there players that can contend?
Yeah, I think barring injury or a collapse by his team. We recorded some today for ESPN, and we talked about like the top 3 in the Player of the Year race. And I said, well, there really isn't a second and a third.
Yeah,
like whoever's next is 4th.
Exactly.
Or 5th. And that's a comment both on his dominance, the way Iowa plays, which allows them to put up some huge numbers. If they were a team that played in the 60s instead of the 90s, his numbers would be 2/3 of what they are, right?
Yeah.
And there really isn't a next guy. I remember a year where Adam Morrison and J.J. Redick were lighting it up, and they fought it out for Player of the Year. And way, way, way back before you guys were born, Christian Laettner and Shaquille O'Neal fought it out for Player of the Year. Like, that's just not happening right now.
Yeah, they also fought it out for that final spot on the Dream Team.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, Leitner won all the college accolades in the Dream Team, but I think it's pretty clear who was the better pro anyway.
Yeah.
For sure, without question. So before we wrap up and before we let you go, give us your a little way too early Final Four prediction about 3 months from the tournament.
All right, let's see. Well, my Final Four, public Final Four on ESPN.com before the season started was Gonzaga, Baylor, Creighton, and Kentucky.
Ooh.
So 3 out of 4,
Yeah.
Still got a real shot. Let's stay in the SEC, and I'll sub Tennessee in for the Wildcats.
I like it. Joey Brackets, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. And to all our viewers out there, make sure you check them out on ESPN's Bracketology. Thank you again.
You bet. Good luck, fellas.